Okay, chapter 17. In the end of the previous chapter, the Alter Rebbe introduced a second form for how a person can feel, well, let me rephrase that, how a person's mitzvah activities can impact Hashem in as intense a level. So let's sort of recap, and then we'll move on to this chapter, which finally brings us to a real crescendo. This is a real concluding aspect, this chapter. Our recommendation is that everybody should be rich and healthy. Sure, that's what we like. The mechanism here is we engage the intellect, which is always receptive to the infinite of Hashem. I can imagine something other than myself. And that's why when the child says, I want a candy, and we say, well, candies will give you cavities, we are expressing to them this ability for the intellect to overrule and maybe even to transform the impulse. Mind rules the heart. So head, heart, hands. Think it, feel it, do it. That is um, our target. That is our optimal method. Then the Alter Rebbe goes on to acknowledge that some people, their hand of their intellect does not reach that high. So just like you can't expect someone to be taller than they are, sometimes a person has a certain limitation. Just like, why don't you just run faster or play the piano and so on? There are certain limitations to our neshama as it is embedded within our human experience. And so for them, the Alter Rebbe quoted the statement in the Gemara that reads in Hebrew, Machshava Tova, translation, a good thought, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, Mitzarfa, and that's the key word, which I'm going to leave untranslated for a moment, Lemaisa. Now, the common interpretation of this phrase is that if a person intends to do a mitzvah, but then the mitzvah got done by somebody else. So I went to blow the shofar for someone. I found out they already heard the shofar. I tried to do the mitzvah, and the mitzvah was done already. So the fact that I had the good intention of doing it, Hashem considers it or credits me as if I had done that mitzvah. However, the Alter Rebbe really bears down on this particular word, mitzarfa, which literally translates, as the Alter Rebbe points out, is to connect, to fuse together, not to consider, but to connect. So now the Alter Rebbe backs it up and rereads it differently. That when a person has the good thought, and the good thought is not just the thought of doing something good, but the thought itself is the good. That is, he's doing the mitzvah because this is important to Hashem. Then, even though he doesn't have this fluidity to have think it, feel it, do it, there is somewhat of a blockage. So his love is more conceptual than it is emotionally sensed. It's more of the idea that I want to be connected with Hashem than it is the aching desire to be connected with Hashem. Hashem bonds it and connects it. So just like if I brought you some scribble scrabble, you'd say, "What is this?" and throw it out. But if I told you it was made by your grandchild as an act of love for you, even though it's the same scribble scrabble of a few crayons, it's not the product, it's the desire of the child to be connected with you, to give you their pauper's offering that is so meaningful that it penetrates to the person. At the very end of the chapter, the Alter Rebbe referenced a Kabbalistic idea that we are familiar with, and that is the structure of how we go from the infinite to the finite. And within it, there are four primary degrees of awareness. And those are what we call the four worlds. Again, they're not locales, they're not places, they are four stages of awareness. The most profound stage of awareness is called Atzilus, where I recognize that I am Eitzel, that's the root of that word. I am next to God. The next stage after that is Bria, which means creation, that I am a creation of Hashem. So a little bit more about me, but again, the emphasis being that I'm a creation. Ipso facto, there's a creator. The third level is called the world of Yetzira, art. So I am art. If there's art, there's got to be an artist. And the fourth level, which is the least aware of God, is the world of me, where I'm busy, I'm doing things, the world of asiya, of action. Our natural state of awareness is myself. I'm here. I begin with the premise of my own existence. I'm busy. What about God? Oh, yeah, God too. So if I'm asked to describe what's in the room, I say the book and the table and the pen. What about God? Oh, yeah, that too. So God is not immediate awareness. When we overcome that natural state of self awareness to become Hashem aware, we now have truly elevated ourselves away from ourselves. And again, we might suggest that this is one of the core messages of Hasidus, which could be summarized as we want to get over ourselves. Our premise is that I'm here, I want, I need, I am afraid, I am joyous. This will make me happy. This will make me fulfilled. This will give me, this will do for me. And as we've talked about, we sometimes treat Hashem that way, and we may even treat other people that way. This is my doctor. This is my bus driver. This is my cashier. That is, I define people as they are connected to me. This happened. Let me tell you how it happened to me. This happened. Let me tell you about my connection to it. Let me tell you about how I know that person. Let me tell you about how that affected me. And we're trying to turn it around and not think about the Hashem in context of myself. It's very much the message of this time of year. We're not just talking about Hashem as the creator and the giver and the provider and so on, which is what Hashem does for me. We're trying to talk about Hashem independently of myself, which is a hard thing. So when a person engages their intellect to expand themselves beyond themselves, they are elevating themselves outside of the level of asiya, where I am, again, primarily fixated on myself. And they are now at a greater degree of awareness, a greater level of awareness. That level is called Yetzira, if it's even more so, because it's driven by the intellectual drive. So it's sustainable, it's not going to be disrupted. It could even reach the level of Bria. It could even potentially reach the level of Atzilus, although that is really reserved for the highest level of Tzaddik, where he doesn't think about himself. You see him. You don't see the human. You see the godliness that courses through their existence. And again, this can happen through one of two general parameters, and it's never so absolutely rigid, yay or nay. We are all somewhat of a spectrum of this, which is either intellect rules the heart that rules the behavior, and I overcome myself, or even if my intellect can't penetrate my heart, I still really want what I want. My intellect's desire on Hashem's side, like the finger painting, is received with that degree of intensity and awareness and overcoming of self. This is what I did for you, even though it's just a finger painting. Now, here in chapter 17, we are finally going to, based on all that we have learned until now, we are going to be able to address the core question of Tanya. You recall that on the title page of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe described that the entire objective of Tanya is to explain one verse in the Torah. It's a verse from chapter 30 in Devarim, Parshas Nitzavim. We just read it 2 weeks ago. And here's that verse here. Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to the people, and he says to them, this commandment that I command you this day is not concealed from you, nor is it far away. So the person says, again, these are the Jews in context, but it's an eternal message, as we'll see. They say, we can't do this. It's too hard. I can't get over myself. You can't expect me to not think about everything as it relates to me. I like it. I'm afraid of it. I want it. I appreciate it. I value it. It is not in heaven. You say, this is for heavenly people. That you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and fetch it for us to tell to us that we can fulfill it. Meaning it's not something that's far away, that this is for other people. This is for holy people and so on. You recall that one of the core messages which the Baal Shem Tov brought to the world is that every Jew can be in a meaningful, profound relationship with Hashem. And sometimes even the unlettered can have a more profound relationship with Hashem than the righteous. Now, many of the righteous people, the scholars and so on, got a little huffy about this. Now, again, I don't think they were saying that you couldn't have a relationship with Hashem unless they were just mean, but they were like, come on, you can't tell me that this guy who's not scholarly, who's not pious, can have a superior relationship. And then there was the group of people who were not pious and not scholarly, who also didn't appreciate this. Why not? Because they were like, well, you don't expect me to do this. Yeah, you. I mean, this is not only an opportunity, it's an obligation. This is for heavenly people. This is not for, I'm just the guy who sits in the back. I don't want to make noise. I don't want to give anything. This is for holy people. This is for heavenly people. This is not for me. It is not beyond the sea that you should say, who will cross the other side of the sea and fetch it for us to tell to us that we can fulfill it. It's not something that, well, if I lived in that circumstance, if my life was completely different than it is today, if I wasn't who I was, then I could do it. But now it's too late. Rather, this thing, this matter, and you see it's in the singular, and that's very important, is very close to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so that you can fulfill it. So the Alter Rebbe says the entirety of Tanya is to explain this one pasuk. Now, we are accustomed to an academic style where you raise a point, a thesis, you raise a seemingly contradictory point, an antithesis, and you dig deeper until you find a synthesis. This is a standard mechanism of study that you see something that maybe on the surface appears pretty mundane, pretty harmless, pretty vanilla. But then you raise a counter quote and you say, whoa, these two things can't coexist. One of them has got to be wrong. Well, of course, Torah can't be wrong, and we can't. So then we got to dig deeper until we find something more meaningful. And we will somewhat explore that. What the Alter Rebbe does in the beginning of this chapter truly captures not only the academic message which the Alter Rebbe is bringing, it also illustrates the distinctive strategy which the Alter Rebbe brings in the Tanya. Now, again, this to us may seem incredibly obvious because it's the water we swim in. This was tremendously revolutionary in the times of the Alter Rebbe, that you wouldn't just do some sort of academic debate. Is it this way or is it that way? And round and round. Rather, the Alter Rebbe is, as we would say in our modern parlance, gets real. He talks up to the person in the person's personal life experience, as we will see. So we begin chapter 17, and as we often point out, that whenever we begin a chapter, we look for the letter Vav. This chapter begins with the letter Vav, and therefore it's a continuation, because the letter Vav means and. It's a continuation, and we'll see other chapters don't always begin with the letter Vav. And it's the flow of this idea, that based on these two ideas, that we can come closer to Hashem in a manner which Hashem appreciates, either through think it, feel it, do it, or at least through think it, and even if I can't really feel it, Hashem, again, back to my finger painting analogy, absorbs it with that level of intensity that elevates it to a level higher than it would otherwise be. We use the analogy of the wings, like the bird without wings is still a bird, but it's kind of not so birdy, and it's not too likely to survive the wild. So too, mitzvahs done without love and fear, they're mitzvahs, don't ever diminish that, but they're not too mitzvah-y, and they're less likely to survive the animal soul that's constantly gnawing at them and trying to consume them. So we have these two characteristics. So now, based on all that we have talked about, that is, we've gone 16 chapters. The Alter Rebbe told us on the title page that the mission statement of Tanya is to explain this pasuk. So you might have anticipated, as a standard form, we begin the first page, we quote the pasuk, and then we say, okay, what's sort of complicated about this pasuk? Like I said, it seems pretty straightforward. It seems kind of harmless. But then we say, wait, here's a counter pasuk. And like a perpendicular line, these two intersect and they seem to negate each other. So then, as you may recognize, we say it in the morning davening. It's one of the 13 mechanisms of derivation. When you have two contradictory verses, you look for a third verse that's going to make peace between them. We're not doing that here. And that's one of the things that was pretty radical about Tanya, that the Alter Rebbe took it head on, as we'll talk about. So why doesn't the Alter Rebbe begin chapter 1 with Tanya? You told me we're going to talk about it. We've gone 16 chapters. We haven't even talked about it yet. So because in order for us to understand why this is potentially complicated, we have to have all of this background. So remember that before we started learning Tanya, our basic presumption was that a tzaddik is a really nice guy, and a Rasha is a horrible villain, and a Beinoni is, a good guy. But, everybody makes mistakes and so on. We have now spent the first couple of chapters laying out the chessboard about what different players each team has and how they are to address each other and cancel each other out. And like in the game of chess, you can't have two pieces occupying the same space. In that moment, my thought is either a godly thought or it's an ungodly thought. My speech is either a godly speech or it's an ungodly speech, and my action as well. And then we started to talk about how we have the tzaddik who has transformed or at least quieted his self-serving animal soul. And the Rasha is the person who, even for a moment, even rarely, and even not something all that intense, disconnects from Hashem. And the Beinoni never disconnects from Hashem. Yet, he may never overcome the struggle, which is how we are going to understand the oath. The whole world is telling him he's a tzaddik, not because the world doesn't know the truth, not because the world doesn't understand what the term tzaddik is, but because that's what they can see. All they can see that he does, all they can see that he speaks, and even if they can intuit his thoughts are all righteous. That's in fact. What they can see, and what he should always consider himself to be, is as vulnerable to the struggle as the Rasha, as internally potentially conflicted as the Rasha. And that's why the world is telling him he's a tzaddik, not because they're naive, not because they don't understand, but because that's what they can see. And the Tanya, the Gemara, and as the Tanya explains it, because that quote comes from the Gemara, is reminding the person strategically, don't be so sure of yourself. You may, in fact, be still internally struggling like the Rasha. And therefore, you have to consider yourself like, not that you are the Rasha. And that may always be your life. You may never get to the point where all you want to do is mitzvahs. You may still forever want to sit on the couch, whatever it is. And, the Alter Rebbe kind of says, that's okay, as long as, in fact, your every conscious thought, spoken word, and deed is in alignment with the infinity of Hashem, even though you struggle internally. Now, based on this, we're going to finally be able to understand why the verse is not so straightforward. Because remember, the key question of the verse is on this word, in your mouth and in your heart. That's the key point. Meaning, we have just gone through describing that a person may never be able to truly control his heart. He can't control what he likes. He can control what he willfully thinks about, what he says, and what he does. But what he likes, which is what we're associating with in your heart, is not within a person's capacity. That's the tzaddik. And that's the rarest of rare people, not just in accomplishment, but even in potential. The potential to be a tzaddik is not offered to everybody. It's only offered to the rarest of the rare. Now, we don't know. Maybe you do have that. You have to aspire to it. You have to work towards it, etc., etc. But in fact, we're really shooting for Beinoni, who overcomes his struggle. We're not really anticipating that we'll get to a point where we have zero struggle. So the question on this pasuk is the heart. Now, not only is it the heart, but it's close. Meaning the pasuk says not only can you, it's almost dismisses it as if it's easy. It's close. It's not only close, it's very close. I mean, it's like mocking us. This is easy. It's very close to you. Very close. We have basically described it as predominantly impossible, right? It's only for the rare person who's going to be a tzaddik. And the pasuk says not only that it's possible, but that it's easy, close, easy. Not only close, very close. And what is the difference between something being close and being very close? So now we're like, hey, yeah, this pasuk that seemed pretty straightforward, that seemed, so to speak, pretty harmless, all of a sudden, this doesn't seem to jive with us at all. So now we recognize why the Alter Rebbe didn't begin chapter 1 with this pasuk, because in chapter 1 we still thought, yeah, it's pretty close. Everyone can be a Beinoni. He's a pretty good guy. He's a nice guy. He's kind and thoughtful. And he does mitzvahs. Does he mess up? Yeah, everyone messes up from time to time, but it's not like some crazy thing that he thinks, oh, I have to go to the sky, to the heavens, or across the sea. Yes. And don't tell me you can't get to shul every day. You can. You can. Come on, who are you kidding? You know that you can, not yell at people. You know that you can. Right. So if we took that sort of social understanding, then this pasuk is not such a big deal. This pasuk is, pretty straightforward. But now that we understand that this is not just some sort of hazy concept of righteous and wicked and Beinoni, but it's something very precise, and the primary difference between the Beinoni and the tzaddik is what he wants, because in behavior they are identical. They only willfully think about godly things. They only willfully say godly things. They only willfully do godly things. The difference is that the Beinoni struggles and the tzaddik doesn't struggle. So what does it mean? That in your heart is where there's always going to be the battle. The battle is always raging in the heart of the Beinoni, even potentially for his whole life. He may never be free of that battle. And yet the pasuk says it's very near to you in your heart. So we're now quite frustrated with this pasuk. Whoa, but we wouldn't have understood that if we wouldn't have had these 16 chapters of introduction. So now we're ready to finally tackle this. Now, curiously, and I'll email you the chart later, you could kind of look back on the verses that lead up to this in this chapter, and you can make somewhat of a parallel, if you're willing to be a little imaginative, between the different stages that the Alter Rebbe has walked us through to get to this question. So there's somewhat of a parallel for this setup, because remember, every word in Torah is absolutely precise. It's not like just poetry and so on. And so we can sort of see a pattern there that leads us to this question. Based on this lengthy introduction, we now can begin the chapter. Ubezeh, and now Yuvan we can finally understand. And the two things we're focused on, which are from the previous chapter, is the two different principles of how people can connect with Hashem. The principle number one, the primary, is think it, feel it, do it. The second is think it reaches the heart, but it struggles in the heart, but Hashem considers it as being injected with the love that it comes from. Even though it looks like a finger painting, it's meaningful to the recipient. Okay, that's the pasuk. We're now ready to address it. And here, and I'm not being exaggerated, this is really, to me, my favorite line in all of Tanya. This next phrase here. Why? The lechaira, because what it appears to us is, hu bilvavcha, the question is, and that's really where the emphasis is on this word, the bilvavcha, in your heart. Because again, we understand, although it's very difficult, that there's no such thing as I couldn't help myself, I had to yell at the guy. There's no such thing as I couldn't help myself, I had to eat that. There's no such thing as I couldn't help myself, I had to do that. We know that we are capable of controlling our behavior and controlling our words and even controlling what we willfully think about. It's hard, we get distracted, but we know, if we're honest, that we can, in fact, control what we willfully think about, what we say, and what we do. We know that. But we can't control what we like. we know that just because I like it doesn't mean I'm allowed to do it. Just because I like yelling at people or being lazy doesn't mean. And so the question, the fixation is on that word ubelvavcha, and here the Alter Rebbe says it: neged hachush shalonu. Those three words are the key to understanding all of what Tanya is about, and in part why some people were not so down with it. Those three words translate as our experience suggests otherwise. Now, usually, if a person says, well, I read something in Torah, but that's not what I think, or that's not how I feel, they basically get yelled at. What do you mean? Who cares what you think? This is what it is. If Torah says it, it's true. You're telling me you don't feel that way. That's because you're absorbed with your own material self and so on. And here the Alter Rebbe is saying, well, neged achush shalonu. When he doesn't say, some people have told me, he seems to include himself. It says, our experience suggests otherwise. And that's considered a legitimate question. Now, the Alter Rebbe will go the academic route in a few moments, and he will bring you verses from quotes from the Talmud that suggest that it's not just that I don't like it or that I don't think so. You know, we don't want generally have a lot of consideration for the guy who says, well, I think that commemorating Egypt would be better if I ate something different than matzah. We eat matzah to remind us, well, I don't experience it that way. Well, tough, we get too bad. That's what you have to do. And, there's a certain legitimacy to that. Like the kid who says, well, I don't like science, so I'm not doing my science homework. Well, tough, you have to do it anyway. Life is not just about what you want. And here, the Alter Rebbe, again, as we would say in our modern phrase, gets real. He says, our experience suggests otherwise. Now, again, he's going to quote other verses. And here the Alter Rebbe inserts in the bracket, V'Torah hi nitzkius, and Torah is eternal. Now, this might prompt us to say, well, if we didn't know that, what are we doing here? If we didn't accept the fact that Torah was eternal, why would we even bother studying this? So what does the Alter Rebbe mean when he says Torah is eternal? As if we might have thought otherwise. Because if we thought otherwise, what are we doing here? Well, what the Alter Rebbe means is that Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to a very distinctive generation, a generation that had Hashem obvious to them at every moment. Manna is raining down from heaven. There's a divine cloud. There's miracles all around them. So you might have thought, well, Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to these people, not to people like us who it's very hard for us to see godliness. Again, a child loves their parent. Well, when their parent is nurturing them and taking care of them and holding them and loving them, you think, well, come on, what do you mean you don't feel love for your mother? She's taking care of you 24 hours a day. I mean, again, at a certain point, we tell the child it's unacceptable for you to say that you don't feel a longing and a closeness with the parent who's taking care of you. But when the person's an adult or separated from their parent or whatever it is, so they may say, well, my parent isn't giving me what I need. They're not taking care of me. So you might have thought that Moshe Rabbeinu was speaking to that generation, that they are the ones who see godliness. They're the ones who've experienced 40 years in the wilderness of God's divine care and protection and providing, etc., etc. So for them, it is, quote, easy. And we're going to translate the word karav now as easy, but we're going to tweak that as well. But for right now, let's use that it's very near to them. Because, again, how ungrateful can we tolerate? I don't feel close to God. What is God? What do you mean? Okay, you point to him. You ate breakfast this morning, that manna fell from heaven. You're protected from the sun. You're protected from your enemies. That's Hashem. Okay, I appreciate it. But us, we don't. So again, the Alter Rebbe is not saying that we might have otherwise thought that Torah somehow has expired. We might have thought that this message was only for that generation and not for our generation. And then the Alter Rebbe continues. Shein karav me'od hadavra lahapech. That's the key word. That it is not very near to us, this matter. What does this matter? To redirect libai, our hearts, mitaivas olam hazeh, from the passions for this physical world and the material world, for the buy me, take me, get me's of ice cream, la'avas Hashem emes, to love Hashem truly. And remember, the word truly doesn't mean as opposed to falsely. It means uninterruptedly. Remember, something is true, it is true under all circumstances. It's not just true in the moment when I'm feeling this great gratitude, it's true under all circumstances. And again, our experience is that I can get myself off the couch. No such thing, I couldn't help myself. I can restrain myself from yelling. I can restrain myself from thinking about nonsense when I'm supposed to be concentrating on my davening. I can. There's no such thing as I couldn't help myself. But to only want those things, to feel a passionate desire for godliness, like I feel the passionate desire for my own physical survival, that is not so easy. It's not so very easy to transform my intuitive desire for survival to become an intuitive desire for Hashem. Not so easy squeezy. So how can we, or what does the Torah mean? I shouldn't say it in an accusatory way. What can the Torah mean when it seems to suggest that it is easy, very easy, to only have love for Hashem? That is, only have love for Hashem. That's it. So that's the human experience that the Alter Rebbe begins with. And again, this was not a common thing. Maybe today we're a little more sensitive to these things because of the gifts of Tanya, that we do ask people, well, how do you feel about that? But in the world of academics, they don't ask you, well, how do you feel about cosine and trigonometry and physics? You know, the facts don't care about your feelings. That's the general attitude that we had towards academia. We don't, you know, whatever it is, law or science or engineering, we didn't ask you how you felt about it. We told you this is the data. Then the Alter Rebbe supports it, again, with an academic side. Now, the Gemara itself already addresses this question. And it asks, is this so easy? We have a pasuk, a different pasuk, that says, Ma Hashem shoel mi'imach. What is it that God asks of you? Ki'im liyira oisai. Only that you should fear him. So you may be familiar with one of the lessons derived from this quote, which is that the only thing that you can control, and thus the only thing you are expected to control, is fear of Hashem. Meaning, we don't really have the capacity to make too many choices. And by the time we have agency to make those choices, we've already been so preconditioned based on our life experience that it's very difficult to describe that as a choice free of influence. So, for example, you don't get to choose your parents. You don't get to choose where you were born. Weren't we smart to be born in the latter part of the 20th century in the United States and not 1,000 years ago in Tsarist Russia? Wasn't that a smart idea? And you don't get to choose whether your parents sent you to this school or encouraged you or berated you. What's the only thing you can choose? Your integrity, your reverence of Hashem. Now, the Gemara says, and that's such an easy thing, is fearing Hashem. Again, it's also phrased almost in this dismissive manner. Oh, what does Hashem have? Just that you should fear him. And the Gemara says, and is fearing Hashem something so insignificant that it can be sort of declared in this almost dismissive tone? All you got to do, as if that's not a big deal. And then, just to follow that up, the Gemara says, and the Alter Rebbe will address this later, the Gemara says that, yeah, for Moshe Rabbeinu, who's the one who's phrasing it, it's not a big deal. Which, of course, doesn't really answer the question, because we're not expected to be Moshe Rabbeinu. Now, to expand our awareness of this, in some communities, of Torah communities I'm talking about, that is the attitude. Work hard and you will reach any level. The Vilna Gaon, Rebbe Eliyahu of Vilna, who was the leader of the Lithuanian community at the same time as the Alter Rebbe, the story goes that he was asked, how does one become the Vilna, that's the name of the city that he lived in, Gaon? So he made a play on the word Vilna, and he said, Vilna, which in Yiddish would translate as, just want it. So you could say, well, this is very humble of him. He's saying, I didn't do anything and nothing. Anyone can do this. Essentially, though, that's what the perspective is. You know, if you want it, you can do it. Nothing can stop you. It's a very American concept as well, right? We've all heard this. You can do anything you put your mind to. You can be anything you want to be. I mean, it's not true. And here the Alter Rebbe has confirmed this in the character, not in the execution. Now, we have established here from the Gemara, again, so for those who are more academically inclined and don't want to know about, well, that's not my experience. So that's not your experience. That's because you are too engaged in material things. And we can dismiss, look, it's true in other things. You know, when we keep Shabbos, we remember God created the world. Well, that's not my experience. Okay, so work on yourself until it becomes your experience. You know, refine yourself, and so on, which, you know, has some truth to it, of course, and some value, some strategic value. Here, the Alter Rebbe is bringing in an academic side. The Gemara says, so again, it's not just the Alter Rebbe saying this is my experience or this is what, you know, everybody says, because I don't know everybody. I know a couple of dozen people. The Gemara says that even fearing Hashem, which is more accessible than loving Hashem, is not such a small thing. And yet the Pasuk seems to suggest that loving Hashem exclusively, and that's the key word, loving only Hashem, is karav miod. It's very easy, very near. For kol shekain ava, so certainly love. Love is harder than fear. And the Gemara says that even fearing Hashem is not such a small matter. And now he brings another one. The Gamam Razal, he also says that tzaddikim dafka libam b'rishusam, that it is only tzaddikim who can dominate, whose heart is within their domain. Now this word rishus, that their heart is in their rishus, is a word worth talking about for a few moments. Rishus can mean the area of your control. We have a halachic concept, you may be familiar with it. It's the essence of the laws against carrying on Shabbos. So in your Rishus HaYachid, your personal domain, you can carry, but not in a Rishus HaRabim, in an area where the many, the masses, the public have authority. So Rishus means like your house. If you want to paint the interior of your house blue, you paint it blue. It's under your authority. The exterior of your house could even possibly be under some authority of people outside of yourself. So the tzaddikim, their heart, that is what they desire, is completely up to them. And we have just spent basically 16 chapters saying, I can't control what I like. I can only control what I do, including what I willfully think about, say, in action. So only tzaddikim can control what they like. And as we have explained, we're not likely to be eligible to be tzaddikim. Not just that we won't do it, we're not even capable of doing it, not because we're lazy, any more than I'm capable of playing the piano like Beethoven, even if I work very hard at it. So how, again, can the pasuk say that it is very near to you in your heart? So the Alter Rebbe begins the answer by a deeper analysis in the verse. So look here at the verse. Ki karav elech, it is very near to you. Hadavar miyod, this matter, in your mouth, and here's the key word, and in your heart. So mouth and heart, beficha ubelvavcha in the Hebrew, they go together in order so that you can fulfill it. Meaning, as the Alter Rebbe will now explain back in the text here, Ella, what then is it? The lasoisoi. The key to this verse is that final word, the execution, the fulfillment. Ratzaloim, what this means, ha'ava ha'mevia liyidei asiyas ha'mitzvahs bilvad, a love that will result in changed behavior. That's what is within you. Again, a basic rule that we have established. A Jew is not just a human being. The human soul is what God animated Adam with. He blew the nishmas chayim, the breath of life, into his nostrils, and he came alive. And a human being is different than an animal. A human being walks upright, not only physiologically, but conceptually, he can see the infinite. A human being is not locked into himself. A Jew has, and you recall from the second chapter of Tanya, a second animating characteristic, a second soul, which is an actual part of Hashem. And just like a child is an actual part of their parent, and therefore the child longs to be aligned with their parent, it's very much a Yom Kippur message when we strip down everything about our humanity. We don't even eat. We don't even take care of our basic humanity. We strip it all down and become aligned with our neshama. So too, the child is aligned with the parent. Even in nature, an animal cares for and is cared for by the parent, and even within the botany, the fruit comes from it. It represents the fruit tree. Apple trees produce apples. It aligns with its origin. So too, every Jew loves Hashem. What do you mean? I don't like it that much. No, we don't mean loves like it's my favorite thing to do. We mean love. I want to be aligned with that. That's what we mean when we say love. Of course, there are more intense levels of love. But the closest analogy that I can think of is like I love my country. What does that mean? I love the soil in Illinois more than the soil in Toronto? No. It means I want to be associated with that. I want to be absorbed in that. I want to be aligned with that. That's what I desire. That's what we mean by the word love. Love doesn't only mean it's my favorite thing to do. It means I want to be aligned with that. That's what love truly means. Now, based on this, the Alter Rebbe says that it is within the natural skill set of every Jew to stir up that characteristic of love to get the job done. Do I also enjoy sitting on the couch or saying nasty things or daydreaming about nonsense? Yes. Can I control myself that I won't think about that, say that, or do that? Yes. Can I get myself to not even want to? That probably not. I'm going to work on it. The Alter Rebbe is going to give us strategies for how we can try and achieve that. And again, we hopefully all can find something in our lives that was a bad habit that we first had to resist. And then we got to the point where, why did I ever want to do that? It becomes even foreign and maybe even repulsive. But that's a process. And then the next thing comes along, right? You're never done. So we can understand that. And here what the Alter Rebbe is emphasizing, that what the Pasuk is talking about is not to transform and redirect my desires to only be desires for godliness. It is that I can love Hashem enough that gets the job done. That brings me to the performance of mitzvahs. Shehi, which is Ru'usa Deliba, stirring my heart. Shibataluma slave, that is deep down and hidden within my heart. Hidden within my heart is a love of Hashem. Why? Not because Hashem will give me toys, and not because I come from that, and therefore I want to be aligned with my origin. That is an intuitive, just like a child loves their parent. When you ask a parent, why do you love your child, or a child, why do you love your parent? If they give you an answer, that means they don't love them. Because then tomorrow, come up with something better. My mother makes the best, takes care of me. Someone will take better care of you, right? My child is the cutest. There'll be a cuter child. It is simply intuitive. That's it. You love your parent, and your parent loves you simply because you are one. Why does a Jew love Hashem? Because part of him is actually godliness. What happens? It gets buried under all the clutter of distraction and nuance and nonsense and ice cream and potato chips. It gets corroded. So what is within the Jew's capacity? To kickstart that intuitive level of love. Even if it is not fired up in his heart It is not something that he loves the passion. I went to the synagogue. I didn't like it. I did. I did. It is deeply embedded within him, which in part becomes illustrated. And again, if you would, God forbid, say to a Jew, say, well, you're not even Jewish because you don't do mitzvahs, he would get very offended. Why does he get offended? If he says, I'm a basketball fan, and I say, well, can you name me 10 basketball players? He says, no. I said, well, I guess you're not really much of a fan. He's not going to get offended because he comes to realize, you're right, I guess I'm not really that interested. But he knows intuitively that he's a Jew. So why does he get offended if you say, well, you don't do anything Jewish? I don't think you're really a Jew. Why would he get offended? Because intuitively, that's his identity, not because of his accomplishments. And therefore, Karov Mioid, the Alter Rebbe doubles down. It's Karov, the Nekel, and it's easy. Now, what do these two words mean? We have been saying until now, or I have been saying until now, that the word Karov means it's very easy. But we're going to redefine it. The word Karov means it is within you. Bikir Becha, it's within you. Just like the word Karov means a relative. So why am I so interested in my cousin more than I am in my neighbor? Because there's an intuitive connection between me and this cousin. I haven't seen the cousin in 6 years. I don't like the same things that he likes, but there's an intuitive connection. Well, this is what the Alter Rebbe is telling us, that it's karov. It's within your basic packaging. This is how you come out of the factory to be within you. It's karov. It's part of your very being. What then is nekel? Now, nekel is translated as easy, and so the root word is the word for light as opposed to heavy. And the idea being it's easily movable. It's easily movable from deep within you. It may be that deep within you there's a mountain climber, but you would have to train until you could climb mountains. Nekel means it's not only within your capacity, like running a marathon may be within your capacity, but it would take an enormous amount of effort to discover it. Nekel means that it is easily movable from point to point. You can easily bring it to the fore. L'chol adam asher yesh le'moich b'kadkodai. To any man, and we're going to talk about this word, any adam, who has a brain in his head. Now, the Alter Rebbe is not one to use flip expressions like has a brain in his head. Obviously, the brain is in his head. I mean, it's not meant to just be a silly term. We have talked about before that in Hebrew, and much like we find in English as well, we have different words that we can translate as human. There are basically 4 words in Hebrew: Adam, Enosh, Ish, and Gever. Now, in English, we do the same thing. We say this person is male. That's a biological description. We say that someone is a gentleman. That is a characteristic. When we say they're part of the human race, that's a genre. Well, in Hebrew, we have this as well. The word Adam is precise, as you recognize, from the original Adam. And what is distinctive about Adam? That God blew the nishmas chaim, the breath of life, into his nostrils, and he came alive. That he is a combination of dirt that God made the body from and the breath of life. Now, every other creation, God said, let there be animals and trees and angels and planets, and those remain what they are from birth till death. They simply operate on their trajectory. The sun doesn't decide to rise in the morning. The animal doesn't decide to forage for food. The tree doesn't decide to stretch out its roots and produce its fruit. It simply acts on its trajectory. Only human beings have the ability to go beyond their nature. Now, they can even go beneath their nature and do things that are unbecoming a human, which animals can't do, but only humans can go beyond their nature. What is the mechanism for going beyond their nature? That is indicated in the word Adam, which is a combo word of the letter Aleph, which represents Hashem. It's the first letter. Hashem is the first. It's the word Aleph is like the English word aluf, above. And the second word is dam. Dam is blood. But in this context, it's a representation of biological function. You recall the prohibition of eating blood is described as the animal's blood is its whole being. The animal only exists out of its biological imperative. That's why it reproduces. That's why it eats. That's why it lives until it dies. It has no aspiration other than its own survival. So a human being has that as well. That's their dumb. That's their biological imperative. They breathe involuntarily. We digest involuntarily, and our blood pumps through, God should be good to us, involuntarily. The aleph is our ability to put something above our biological function. And this is what distinguishes the Jew from just the human, the ability to do something completely outside of their own agenda, to do something that has nothing to do with me, total surrender of self. And again, it's very much a Yom Kippur message. It's not about me. We talked about Elul is the combo of lo with an aleph, lo with a vav. Nothing about me. It's not about me. That's the ability of a human being. That's of a Jew. That's the ability of Mesiras Nefesh, not just the great heroes who in a moment have Mesiras Nefesh, but to have this awareness that I am not here just for the collection of my experiences. I don't just view God as, well, God did this for me. I don't view other people just as, well, this is the person who does this for me. This person is valuable because of what they do for me. Instead, I see myself as being in the service of Hashem. So that is the mechanism, the strategy for how we overcome ourselves. So I want to sit on the couch, but they need me to go and help them. Well, why should I? Well, if you give me an incentive, well, sitting on the couch will give you this pleasure, but if you get off the couch, you'll have a better pleasure. So now it's a competition. That is not done out of love. That's done out of a form of what's in it for me. Again, this is why people didn't like time. This is way too demanding. And this is a real intense level. I mean, that I should do it for Hashem. That's an intense level. And it's one that, if we're honest, which, one of the previous Rebbe said, one thing about Americans, they're very honest. They don't couch it. They don't sort of skirt the issue. They just, boom, straight up in your face and say, no, I'm only interested in things that benefit me. They don't even pretend that there's any virtue there. Look out for number one. I mean, this is our whole cultural mentality. So the Alter Rebbe is saying that if you are Adam because you have a brain in your head. Now, again, the Alter Rebbe is not one for flippant terms. The idea being that you can still control what you think about. Now, later, the Alter Rebbe will talk about a person who we might use the term today, he's a psychopath, that he has literally forfeited the ability to engage his intellect and get himself out of where he is. Now, that sounds like a crazy extreme, and maybe it is, so to speak. Hopefully it is. But unfortunately, our society, if you haven't gotten any other message, that's the message you get, right? What do you want more than anything else in the world? Now go out there and get it, right? What is the typical first day of high school lecture? What do you want more than anything in the world? Now go out there and get it. In other words, your heart should dictate to your mind what to do. What do you want? Now figure out how to get it. Well, we're trying to flip that on its head. What is the higher purpose? Now get excited about it. It's diametrically opposed. It's like the competition between the secular system and the Torah system. They have two completely independent agendas. One is the fulfillment of my deepest dreams. The other is the surrender of myself to the service of Hashem. They can get along for a while, but again, just to back up for 1 minute, I know I'm going down one of my rabbit holes here, but bear with me. What were they so upset about Abraham with? Abraham Avinu came along and he said, I got one God. Everyone has a God. Abraham's father sold gods. You got a God. He's got a God. Who cares? Why are they so angry at him? Because he says his God is better than everybody else's God. That's what everybody said. Everybody said their God was better. That's why they liked their God. Because they were saying, my God is better than your God because my God will give me better things. So you worship your God. I worship my God. Whoever wins, that's evidence that his God is greater. Meaning this was the classic thing. When one country conquered another country, the conquered had to come face to face with, well, their system failed. So they give up their system for the conqueror system. They give up their language, they give up their foods, they give up their song, they give up their gods because their gods failed them. Now, what the thing that our enemies don't understand is the more we get attacked, the more resilient we become. And that's what they didn't like about Abraham, because Abraham said, you got it backwards. God is not validated by what he does for you. We are here to serve God, not the other way around. God's not here to serve us. It's true. We're partners, and God gives us the best ways to live and the most joyous and the most meaningful. Those are all true. But it's not a case of, I'll do for you and you do for me. This is not a mercantile exchange of goods and services for pay. This is about getting over myself. My mind is in my head. It's not in my heart. If I'm trying to figure out how to get what I want, then my mind is in my heart. If my mind is in my head, this is the distinctive characteristic, that physical ability to look up and see the infinite as opposed to look down and see what's staring me in the face. This is the point that is always available if I keep my mind in my head and not my mind in my heart. Because if my mind's in my heart, then I'm always looking at everything from an angle. How's this going to benefit me? What's in it for me? And again, I'm sure you people experience it more than me because you live in the world of falseness much more. They don't even know what you're talking about. In fact, they might snicker at the very idea that you would do something without any personal benefit, that everything is this freakonomics. People are driven only by selfish incentive and what's in it for me. And the concept that you would do something for even having children. They say, well, why would you have children? Oh, well, if you have children, they bring you so much joy and it'll be your eternal legacy. It's all about me. And so people are saying, well, you like that. I like, sleeping late and traveling and having all my money to buy my own stuff. This idea, well, you should have children because it's the commandment of be fruitful and multiply, even though it's the most selfless thing to have a child, is incredibly selfless. Why would I do that? So if we're going to try this thirst trap of marketing, having children is the greatest joy. Look how happy it is. Yeah, well, look at them when they spit up and they scribble on the walls, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're going back and forth. And this is what the Alter Rebbe means. Ki moiche b'reshusai. This is the no excuses. Your thoughts are always within your domain. No such thing as I couldn't help myself. I had to think about something else. Now, a person can get, like Paro, so far down that they can't even control themselves. They need like a spiritual wake-up call to get their mind back in their head. It's not in their head. It's in their heart. It's a person can willfully sit down and think only about godliness. That's really what Yom Kippur is about. The davening is just a form to keep you focused. But what we're really shooting for is stripping down our humanity. Again, the most basic elements of our human existence, and only thinking about Hashem. Okay, where do I start? Well, here's a book. That's what the book is for. There's no thing to do on Yom Kippur, right? There's no shofar, there's no lulav. There isn't some action item. There isn't something to do. It's just to be in that moment with Hashem, in that infinite moment. It's hard, right? Again, not for you, but for me, as soon as I sit down, my mind starts wandering to nonsense. Because when a person will think about the infinity of Hashem, my line, no thing can compete with the nothing. Memela, this is the key word, automatically, effortlessly, absolutely. When we think about the infinity of Hashem, yoilid, it will produce b'moichai in our thinking. I'll call upon him at least ha'ava la'Hashem l'dafka b'y b'kiyim mitzvaysa v'seirasai. It will at least create enough love of Hashem to motivate me to do the mitzvah. I may still like sitting on the couch. I may not like complying, but I like it more, or I should say I love Hashem more than my desire to sit on the couch and daydream or yell or whatever it is. I can love Hashem more than the temptation that is staring me in the face. So you might think, so that's it? So the Alter Rebbe just adds this words, v'zeh kol ha'adam, and that is the entirety of mankind. That's what's expected of. Lest you feel like, well, but it's not real, because it's not genuine because I don't truly feel this experience. That's a trick of the Yetzer Hara that says, well, if you don't truly feel it, it's not worth it because you know what? If I need a ride to the airport and the guy takes me to the airport, even if it's not his greatest passion, I still got to the airport. I got what I needed. Yes, wouldn't it be nice if it was his greatest joy? Yes, but it's a lot better than I get to the airport, then he says, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. Don't love me so much. Just pick me up on Tuesday. Okay? This message. So this is what we mean that it is within your natural capacity, in your heart. Not that you should only love Hashem, but you can love Hashem enough to get the job done. Unless you think, well, come on, that's so shallow. Zeh kol ha'adam. That's the entirety of mankind. All right.